Hello, and welcome back to the studio. I'm Dr. Wigo, and today we're going to talk about, is the MacBook Neo a Trojan horse for the corporate market? I think it is, and I'll explain why. We all know the MacBook Neo was announced on March 4th and shipped on March 11th for $599, $499 education price, and that price will come back in a minute. In fact, you can go watch my review of it right here. But Apple Business was announced on March 24th in a press release and will be available on April 14th. What is Apple Business? Before you click away, let me do some splaining. First, I'm going to do a quick overview of the Apple Business announcement press release, but that's only the beginning. Then I'll talk about Apple's past efforts to get into business, going all the way back to the Apple III. They've been trying a long time, but I think they might make it this time. Then I'll talk about what businesses want when it comes to PCs and laptops, and tablets and phones. But then I'll talk about how I think the MacBook Neo is going to fit in and how it's going to change the face of the world. Okay, that's a bit of hyperbole, but it's going to change the face of business and Apple's market share. So what is Apple Business? It's this new program that combines the previous programs, the Apple Business Manager, the Apple Business Essentials, and Apple Business Connect. Well, what were those? Apple Business Manager came out in 2018, and it was focused on helping companies deploy Macs and phones and manage Apple accounts for business. This gets really interesting in a minute. Then in 2021, Apple brought out Business Essentials, which was basically a support program and repair service and cloud storage. And we'll talk about that in a little while. And then more recently in 2023, they came out with Business Connect, which is how your business appears in Maps and the Wallet and Siri and more. And we're going to come back to that too, because it's now all in one platform called Apple Business, which will start being available April 14th. And if you have a business, you should probably go check it out, and I'll have a link down below where you can go to the Apple website. One of the things Apple Business brings over from Apple Business Manager is mobile device management. And it includes Macs, iPads, and iPhones. And with Apple Business, you'll be able to configure employee groups. So when you go to add a new employee, you can just add them to a group, and it will automatically use this blueprint for pre-configured apps and settings and security. So every Mac you give to an employee will have the same apps, the same security settings, and all sorts of stuff already blocked in, built in, baked in. They're also adding business email, calendar, and directory service with your own domain names. This is where Microsoft has been so successful in the corporate world because of their Exchange server where they can handle all this stuff. Now Apple will have all that too, and upgraded iCloud storage. OneDrive is another Microsoft thing that's big in businesses. But the big one is Apple Care Plus for business. So a company can have Apple handle all of the repairs and service on all of their equipment. There'll be a process where an employee can log into the Apple Business app and then request for service, and then the IT people can approve it, and then they can say, just take it to Apple, and Apple will handle the service. That Apple Business app for employees will also help them install apps, view colleague contact information, request support, all that kind of stuff. But the Apple Business app for the IT people will be way more powerful. One of the key features of Apple Business will be managed Apple accounts. So you'll sign in with an Apple account, but it's tied to your company. But on your device, you can also be signed into your personal Apple account at the same time. And there will be, and I love this phrase, cryptographic separation of the two Apple accounts so that one can't see the stuff of the other. The Apple Business app at the corporate level will handle employee management, app distribution, and there will be an admin API with access to device, user audit, and MDM service data. MDM is mobile device management. And there's going to be enhanced discoverability in Apple Maps, including ads, which I'm not fond of, but I bet companies will be. This is not Apple's first attempt to break into the corporate market. They started with the Apple III because the Apple II was so complicated and you had to get cards and parts and things. So they made the Apple III, which was everything in one box, so it would be easier for corporations to deploy. And it didn't work out so well. But then the Lisa, that was supposed to, with the graphical user interface, greatly simplify computers for businesses, because in the 80s, managers weren't really typists and the secretaries handled all that, so the point and click would have worked great. But that didn't work out real well. And then they tried again with the Mac. In fact, in David Pogue's book, which I will link down below, he tells the story of the Apple focus group with the Macs. They had these focus groups with Macs and PCs sitting in a room, and they'd have these executives come in and play with them. And every question they asked, they said the Mac is better, the Mac is better, the Mac is better, the Mac is better. And then they asked the big question, which one will you buy for your company? And they all pointed at the IBM PC because no one gets fired for buying IBM. But that was because of support, because you knew IBM was going to be around to take care of things. So Windows machines dominated the business market from the 80s all the way through now. Windows NT was even built around a whole client-server architecture to make it easier for businesses to deploy. And then Apple tried again, as I said, with the Business Manager, the Business Essentials, and the Business Connect, but those really didn't take off so much either. So now they've consolidated it into one thing, Apple Business. And why is this going to be different? It comes down to what businesses want. They want security. Apple is now more secure and has a reputation for being more secure. Businesses want stability. Apple is now more stable. A PC Magazine article, which I will link down below, says Windows users have 7.5 times more freezes and 2.2 times more crashes. So the Mac's more stable. Companies want manageability, to be able to do common deployment and set things up and make it easy to deploy these devices throughout the organization. That's what the Apple Business app is going to do. It's going to have those blueprints so you can say this person is in sales and they're in Kansas City, and it'll load the apps and everything that are appropriate for that particular location and department. Companies want serviceability. Apple Care Plus for business. Apple Care Plus for business is going to be a big change because, you know, if you ever worked in a company, you got to call the IT guy and they got to send somebody over. And now you'll just report your problem on the Apple Business app and the company will get back to you and say, just take it over to Apple and they'll take care of it. And companies want affordability. Here comes the MacBook Neo. So here's how the MacBook Neo fits into this. That $499 education price sets an expectation that these companies will be able to negotiate down to around that price when they're buying hundreds or thousands of MacBooks at the same time. Most employees can just get a MacBook Neo because that's all they'll need. But employees who need more powerful MacBooks, well, guess what? They're there. They can get anything all the way up to an M5 Pro MacBook Pro or a Mac Studio. The other thing is the MacBook Neo is more durable and more powerful than almost all Windows PCs near that price. So it makes it almost a no-brainer. They won't break as often and they're faster. Plus now Mac OS is more stable than Windows, as I already mentioned, and it's less ad-filled. I don't know if you've been on Windows lately. They put up ads for everything. The Apple Business Blueprints will make deployment easier, and iPhones and iPads will fit in there too. So in the 80s, IBM was the biggest hardware maker and Microsoft was the biggest OS maker, but now Apple is the biggest hardware maker and makes a more robust and stable operating system. So to me, these two announcements were related, the MacBook Neo and then just a few weeks later, Apple Business. This is Apple pursuing a market that they've been trying to get into since the very beginning, and I think they may pull it off this time with the MacBook Neo and Apple Business. So what are my final thoughts on this subject? I said in my review, which you can see up here, that the MacBook Neo was a game changer, but I was talking about for the education market. It didn't occur to me that the MacBook Neo could be the final arrow in the quiver that Apple needed to attack the corporate market. So keep your eye on Apple's market share because I think the MacBook Neo and Apple Business could really make inroads into the corporate market and grow their market share tremendously. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for stopping by. See you next time. Bye-bye. Now I got to go come up with some more stuff about Apple and business. Thanks for staying to the end. Bye-bye.